Lady Louise Windsor did not raise her voice. She did not slam a door or make a dramatic exit. She simply looked across the private royal gathering, held her composure, and delivered 8 words that seemed to tear through years of family restraint. "Camilla will never be my family." For several seconds, nobody moved. King Charles stared down at the table. Prince Edward went rigid, and Camilla herself appeared completely unprepared for what came next. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The silence turned heavy. Charles knew the meeting at Windsor had been arranged because arguments over loyalty, private access, and influence were dividing the family. Windsor, a royal residence, served as a place for family discussions away from ceremonies. But this gathering was no routine conversation. Louise had spoken directly in front of Camilla, the king, Edward, and Sophie, and she had removed every escape from the room. Louise felt fear rise in her chest, yet she did not retreat. She watched Charles, expecting him to defend his wife. He did not react immediately. The monarch kept his eyes lowered, absorbing each word, and that hesitation told the young royal her statement had struck far deeper than anger. For Louise, this mattered because she respected her uncle. She had never wanted to wound him, but pretending affection for Camilla felt like a betrayal of herself. Camilla finally moved. Her expression tightened as she asked whether Louise truly meant what she had said. The queen consort, the title used for the wife of a reigning king, waited for a softer answer. None came. Louise replied that she had spent too long acting close to a person she did not trust. Her voice remained calm. That calmness hurt more than shouting could. Edward pulled his chair closer to his daughter. The gesture was small, but Louise noticed it. He did not interrupt her or tell her to apologize. Instead, the prince stayed beside her, making it clear he understood the pain behind those 8 words. Across the table, Sophie placed her teacup down and looked straight at Charles. The trusted confidant said nothing, yet the king saw something in her face that unsettled him. Camilla saw it too. She rose, pushed her chair back, and left before the discussion had ended. Charles waited until the door closed. Then he turned to Sophie and asked, quietly, what happened between them. And when Sophie finally began to explain, Charles realized Louise's 8-word rejection had not been born in that room. It had been building inside her for much longer. To understand why Lady Louise could say something so brutal with such remarkable calm, one truth has to be understood. She had never been the loudest member of the royal family. Louise had built her reputation on restraint. She listened before speaking. She stepped back when others competed for attention. That was exactly why her rejection of Camilla felt so dangerous. When the quietest person in the room finally speaks, every word carries the weight of everything they refused to say before. Louise had learned duty from Prince Edward and Sophie long before she understood how complicated royal loyalty could become. Her father taught her that duty meant service, while her mother reminded her that rank could never force trust. That mattered now because Camilla had begun expecting younger royals to show visible unity around Charles and his household. For Louise, respect was possible. Pretended affection was not. Days before the confrontation, Louise sat privately with Sophie and finally admitted what had been troubling her. She felt guilty. She knew her feelings toward Camilla could hurt Charles, and the king remained an uncle she respected deeply. Yet every polite smile had started to feel false. Sophie listened, then reached across and took her daughter's hand. The trusted confidant told her there was a difference between cruelty and honesty. Louise lowered her eyes, shaken, because silence no longer felt kind. It felt dishonest. Edward sensed danger before the family meeting began. A private message reached him concerning an earlier confrontation between Louise and Camilla. He read the documented account twice, locked his phone, and said nothing. His silence was deliberate. The prince knew his daughter had carried the incident alone for too long, and he was quietly preparing for the moment that pain finally surfaced. Charles began seeing the pattern only after Louise spoke. The monarch learned she had rejected 3 private invitations to spend time with Camilla. Each one declined without drama or public complaint. That mattered because anger can be sudden, but avoidance repeated 3 times suggests something deeper. He realized her 8 words were not youthful rebellion. They were the end of a long retreat. Sophie finally gave him the missing piece. She told Charles that one royal ceremony had changed Louise completely. After that afternoon, her daughter stopped trying to build any emotional bond with Camilla. The king looked at her carefully, and the trusted confidant explained that what happened afterward was the real reason Louise had stopped pretending. The family could debate loyalty for hours, but the real answer lay in one afternoon, one closed conversation, and the moment Louise decided she would never look at Camilla the same way again. The breaking point had a date, a room, and a sentence Louise could not forget. It happened after a private Windsor family ceremony intended to honor the late Queen's legacy. The gathering itself passed without scandal. The real damage came afterward. While relatives moved toward a reception, Camilla asked Louise to remain behind for a private conversation. No cameras, no aides, no parents. What happened during those few minutes would later become the hidden trigger behind the most shocking statement Louise had ever made. Louise had taken the Windsor legacy ceremony personally. The ceremony, a private family tribute created to honor Queen Elizabeth's traditions, meant far more to her than royal duty. She remembered her grandmother's quiet encouragement and the feeling that service should come from character, not performance. That was why Louise entered the tribute with pride. She believed she was protecting a connection to someone she had deeply loved. Camilla waited until they were alone. The Queen Consort told Louise that younger royals had to stop acting as though affection for the late monarch gave them permission to question the family order now taking shape around Charles. Louise stared at her, stunned. The words felt less like advice and more like a warning. She asked whether remembering her grandmother had somehow become disloyal. Camilla answered carefully, but the sentence cut deeper. She told Louise that maturity meant understanding who the family revolves around now. Louise felt angry tears gather, yet she refused to cry in front of her. The young royal had expected guidance. Instead, she felt her memories of the late queen had been turned into evidence against her loyalty to the king. Louise then noticed several prepared notes concerning future family appearances. Beside her own name stood 2 words: closer alignment. The phrase meant bringing her public duties more closely into another royal household's plans. Suddenly, Louise no longer felt invited into a family bond. She felt managed. Camilla had already considered where she should appear and how closely she should be linked to Charles's household. Sophie found her daughter alone after Camilla left. Louise still held the ceremonial program, crushed tightly in one hand. She refused to explain at first, but later gave her mother a private spoken account of every word exchanged. The trusted confidant listened without interrupting and understood why something inside her daughter had changed. Sophie finally told Charles the truth. Louise had entered the later family meeting already expecting Camilla to pressure her again. This time, she had decided silence was finished. So when Louise walked into that Windsor meeting, she was not waiting to discover whether a confrontation would happen. She was waiting for Camilla to give her the reason to finish it. The confrontation became unavoidable the moment Camilla returned to the room. She had been gone less than 10 minutes, but something in her expression had hardened. Charles remained seated. Edward stood behind Louise. Sophie watched every movement. Then the Queen Consort closed the door herself and asked for one thing: an explanation. Louise slowly rose from her chair. There would be no advisor speaking for her, no carefully drafted palace language. For the first time, the 2 women faced each other with nothing left between them. Camilla looked directly at Louise and asked her to repeat the words to her face. The Queen Consort, the title given to the wife of a reigning king, seemed convinced the younger woman would retreat under direct pressure. Louise did not. She calmly repeated that Camilla would never be family to her. Marriage and title, she explained, could create an official relationship. They could not create trust. They could not force emotional belonging. Camilla's control slipped. She asked whether Louise understood how humiliating those words were. Louise felt the old anger return, and answered that humiliation was exactly what she had felt after the Windsor legacy ceremony. She then repeated the sentence she had carried for days. "Who the family revolves around now." Charles immediately looked toward his wife. Sophie tightened her jaw. Edward told his daughter not to withdraw one truthful word, simply because the truth had become uncomfortable. Louise reached into her belongings and produced the folded appearance notes she had kept since that afternoon. The paper had been handled so many times that the edges had softened. Beside her name remained the phrase, "closer alignment," meaning a plan to connect her public duties more closely with another royal household. Camilla denied using the words as a threat, but Louise held the notes between them and asked why her future had already been discussed without her parents. Charles finally spoke. The king asked whether Camilla had been planning Louise's appearances without consulting Edward or Sophie. His voice stayed controlled, but the monarch's question carried more danger than anger. Camilla hesitated, only for a moment. Yet everyone noticed. Edward moved closer to Louise again. Sophie kept her eyes on Charles, waiting to see whether he would treat the issue as a family disagreement or something more serious. The king understood the difference. Family pressure could be painful. Unauthorized influence over a young royal's duties was another matter entirely. Charles ended the confrontation with a single decision. Nobody was leaving Windsor until he reviewed exactly who had allowed Camilla to become involved in Louise's future arrangements. Louise had entered the room defending her feelings, but Charles was now staring at a far more dangerous issue, the possibility that private family pressure had quietly become a question of royal control. King Charles had spent years learning that royal crises rarely begin with shouting. They begin with paperwork, assumptions, and powers nobody thinks to question until someone gets hurt. Sitting alone after the confrontation, he opened the file connected to Louise's planned appearances. The first page seemed harmless. The second was more troubling. By the third, the monarch stopped turning pages. He removed his glasses, placed them slowly beside the file, and realized his wife had been operating with far more confidence than he understood. Charles read the internal family planning file again. The document, a working record used to organize proposed royal appearances and household involvement, showed Camilla had repeatedly suggested Louise for events linked to the king's household. Edward had never formally agreed. Sophie had never approved the pattern. Yet the suggestions kept moving forward, because staff believed the queen consort's preferences reflected the monarch's wishes. Charles felt the betrayal personally. Louise had clearly assumed the pressure came from him, and that mattered because she had begun avoiding her uncle rather than challenging the king. His silence had created space for others to use his authority without a written instruction. The monarch stared at the page, realizing a family relationship had been damaged by decisions he had not even known were being made. Edward entered for a private conversation and chose his words carefully. The prince told Charles he was not asking for punishment. He did not want revenge against Camilla. He wanted his daughter to stop being treated like an available piece on someone else's royal board. Charles listened without interruption. Edward's anger was controlled, but the king understood that restraint had limits. A senior courtier then gave Charles a documented account of an earlier exchange with Sophie. She had objected to one proposed appearance involving Louise, and was told the request had strong household support. The phrase mattered, because palace staff often used household support to signal backing from senior royal offices. Sophie had naturally believed the pressure came from Charles himself. Charles summoned Camilla. The king tapped one page with his finger and asked why staff had been allowed to believe her wishes carried his authority. She defended herself immediately. The queen consort said she had been trying to strengthen the family before William's future reign and prevent younger royals from drifting away. Charles changed the moment William's name entered the argument. The future reign meant the period when the prince would eventually inherit the crown and shape the monarchy's next structure. Louise's pain was no longer isolated. Camilla had connected it to succession, loyalty, and fear about her own future influence. What began as a painful family statement was now reaching the center of royal power. And before the night ended, Camilla would discover exactly how quickly assumed authority could disappear. Camilla did not receive a dramatic decree. There was no public announcement, and no furious speech from Charles. The first consequence arrived quietly. A folder was removed from her morning briefing. Then 2 planned discussions involving Edward's family vanished from her schedule. Finally, a senior aide entered, placed a revised household note on the table, and explained that decisions concerning Lady Louise would now require direct approval from her parents and the king. Camilla read the sentence twice. The room suddenly felt much larger around her. Charles had moved quickly. Every plan involving Louise would now pass through Edward and Sophie before reaching the monarch. The revised household note, a written instruction explaining how royal staff must handle family decisions, ended Camilla's informal influence over the young woman's appearances. Staff were also told that her personal wishes could never be presented as the king's view unless Charles had clearly authorized them. Camilla remained alone after the aide left. Louise's words returned with brutal force. She would never be family. Losing influence hurt, but the open rejection cut deeper. The queen consort had spent years fighting to secure acceptance inside royal life, and now a younger member of the family had said aloud that acceptance could not be demanded. She looked down at the instruction again and felt the fear beneath her anger. Charles entered later and immediately sensed the change in her. Camilla asked whether he believed she had deliberately tried to hurt Louise. The king paused before answering. He told her intention could not erase impact. A young woman had felt controlled, and because staff believed Camilla spoke with royal backing, Louise had also believed her uncle supported the pressure. Camilla finally admitted what had driven her. In a private spoken conversation with Charles, she confessed she feared the younger generation would slowly isolate her, as his reign weakened, and William's future grew closer. She had wanted stronger bonds before that change arrived. The monarch listened, but sympathy did not remove the damage. Her fear had turned closeness into strategy. Charles answered with painful calm. By forcing Louise toward a relationship she did not trust, Camilla may have created the exact rejection she feared. The queen consort said nothing. He offered no easy reassurance. The king simply left, and the silence after him felt final. Louise received a private message elsewhere in Windsor before the evening ended. Charles wanted to meet her alone the next morning. She read the request twice and immediately feared one thing. The king was going to ask her to withdraw her words. But when Louise entered Charles's private room the following morning, the king was not waiting for an apology. He was waiting to make one of his own. There were no aides in the room, no family advisors, no papers arranged between them. Charles was standing beside the window when Louise entered, and for a moment she did not see a monarch preparing to correct a younger royal. She saw her uncle. He asked her to sit. Louise remained standing. Then Charles said something she had never expected to hear. "You thought I had approved it." Her expression changed instantly. The king already knew the answer before she gave it. Charles spoke before Louise could defend herself. He confirmed that he had never authorized Camilla to pressure her into closer household alignment or control her future appearances. Household alignment meant linking one royal's duties more closely with another senior royal's plans. The king wanted her to understand one thing clearly. The pressure she had felt did not come from him. Louise finally answered. Every indirect request from Camilla had felt impossible to refuse, because she believed saying no to the queen consort meant quietly rejecting Charles himself. That belief had changed how she behaved around her uncle. She had started avoiding private conversations with him, fearing the monarch would question her loyalty or accuse her of resisting the family. Charles looked genuinely saddened. He had expected anger between Louise and Camilla. He had not understood that the damage had reached him too. The king asked why she had never come directly to him. Louise struggled before admitting she had been afraid. For someone raised to respect royal duty, challenging a monarch felt far greater than confronting an aunt. Louise's voice began to shake, but she did not withdraw her words. She told Charles she would not apologize for saying Camilla would never be family to her. Trust had broken. Genuine affection could not be performed simply because royal unity looked easier that way. Tears gathered, yet Louise stayed firm. Charles did not correct her. Instead, he admitted during their private spoken conversation that the monarchy had already caused enough pain by treating personal emotions like duties that could be commanded. The king told Louise he would never order her to feel differently. Respect could be expected, love could not. Charles then apologized. He accepted responsibility for allowing his authority to be assumed in conversations he had never approved. Louise finally sat beside him. The small movement mattered. Her trust had not fully returned, but the wall between uncle and niece had begun to crack. Charles gave her one final warning before she left. The revised household arrangements were already being noticed outside Windsor. The family could no longer assume the confrontation would remain private. The private wound between uncle and niece had begun to heal, but beyond Windsor's walls, Louise's words were already becoming something much larger than a family argument. By midday, the words were everywhere, not because Buckingham Palace released a statement, but because the sudden change in Louise's royal arrangements had triggered intense questions. Then the sentence itself emerged: "Camilla will never be my family." Within hours, broadcasters were interrupting regular discussion, commentators were arguing over loyalty, and crowds outside Windsor were reading updates from their phones. Louise had spoken inside a private room. Britain was now treating those 8 words like a national verdict. Royal correspondents quickly noticed that decisions involving Louise had been returned to Edward and Sophie. The change mattered because direct parental oversight meant her future commitments would no longer move through other senior households without approval. Buckingham Palace, the main working center of the monarchy, released a restrained statement calling Louise a valued family member whose commitments remained under discussion with her parents. The careful wording calmed nobody. It made people look harder. Louise watched the coverage beside Sophie and slowly lost her composure. One commentator accused her of disrespecting Charles. Another questioned whether younger royals understood loyalty. Louise finally turned to her mother and asked whether honesty had made her a family problem. Sophie immediately switched off the television. The trusted confidant told her daughter that refusing forced affection was not the same as attacking the monarchy. Louise breathed slowly and listened, trying to separate public anger from the truth she still believed. Then one front page captured the crisis. A fictional evening newspaper carried a stark image of Louise leaving Windsor beneath 2 enormous words: "Not my family." Near Windsor Castle, a crowd gathered behind the public barriers, arguing over the headline as people checked updates on their phones. Some called her cruel. Others said the young royal had simply spoken aloud about a family tension others would hide. A major broadcaster pushed the debate even further. During a live evening program, the presenter described the dispute as a generational rebellion against compulsory royal unity. That phrase changed the story. Louise was no longer being discussed only as Charles's niece or Camilla's critic. Her statement had become a symbol of the monarchy's struggle between public unity and private emotional truth. Charles watched the broadcast beside Camilla. Neither spoke for several moments. The king finally decided Louise would not be ordered to retract her words. But he also refused to let bitterness become the final memory of the crisis. He would speak directly to both women, without advisors or prepared statements. The public had already chosen sides, but Charles understood that the monarchy's final verdict could not be written by a headline. It had to be settled by the people who had caused and survived the hurt. In the end, King Charles did not demand reconciliation. That was the decision that gave the entire crisis its final meaning. He could change schedules. He could redefine household authority. He could tell staff whose approval mattered and whose influence had gone too far. But the monarch understood something far more painful after listening to Louise. No crown can order one person to love another, and no royal title can turn broken trust into family simply because the institution requires a united photograph. Charles brought Louise and Camilla together for one final private conversation. The king made one thing clear from the beginning: neither woman would be required to perform emotional closeness for public appearances. That mattered because royal unity often depends on visible cooperation, but he now understood that cooperation and affection were not the same thing. He also confirmed Edward and Sophie would retain full control over discussions involving their daughter's future royal role. Camilla spoke first. She told Louise that hearing, "You will never be my family," had been one of the most painful humiliations she had endured. The queen consort admitted during the private conversation that fear had driven her too far. She had worried the younger generation would isolate her in the future, and she had pushed for a bond that simply did not exist. Louise listened without interrupting. She did not withdraw her statement. Instead, she told Camilla she took no pleasure in causing pain and would always treat her with respect as Charles's wife. But respect was courtesy. Family affection was something deeper, and the young royal could not promise a feeling she did not honestly possess. Camilla finally stopped fighting for more. She placed both hands on the chair in front of her and quietly said, "Then I understand." The queen consort left without demanding an apology or asking Louise to pretend again. For the first time, the boundary between them had been spoken and accepted. Charles remained with his niece. He told Louise that honesty carried consequences, but forced loyalty created wounds that lasted even longer. The king then embraced her before she left, repairing the relationship damaged when she wrongly believed he had supported the pressure against her. Louise's statement did not destroy the monarchy. Camilla remained the king's wife. Louise remained his niece. Respect survived, boundaries returned, and the royal family finally admitted that duty can shape behavior, but it can never manufacture love. And that became the final truth of Louise's 8 shocking words. She had not rejected the crown. She had simply refused to call something family when, in her heart, it never had been. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.